Good morning and welcome back to Morning Express. We are glad you're watching. It is D-Day for quite a number of things today. World Cup is the biggest one. But locally, we have the budget. It's all about money, how your money will be spent and allocated, and what priorities the government will have for the next year, 2014-2015. And our Michael Karanja from our business desk is here with us. And for the next 1 hour with his panel, he'll help us understand where we are at, what we are looking at, and what that means for you and me. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Sophia.
It's good to see you.
Nice seeing you too.
So we're talking about football and money.
Yeah, so I don't know if you're going to have offside on money.
I know.
You'll have shortage, penalties.
I bet you there'll be a red card.
Time.
COD will be red carding, one of those things.
One of those statements supposed to be made by Henry Rotich today.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, but we'll see how it goes. It's one of those days that we always look forward to.
Yeah.
Although nowadays they've made it more transparent, so we usually know what the budget has. Just a few nitty-gritties that the minister CES is supposed to highlight later on in the afternoon.
Okay, well,
thank you very much, Sophia.
Karibu.
And as you've been told, yes, we are discussing the budget 2014-2015. And today I'm joined by an able panel consisting of Martin Kisuu, CEO of Tax Consulting, Francis Kamau, who is an Associate Director of Tax Services at Ernst & Young, or EY as they like calling themselves now, and Rosemary Irungu, who is from the Social Accountability Institute. And right off the bat, if I was to start with you, Martin, 1.77 trillion shillings, and it seems like the national government has this consistency of always increasing our budget. Is it something that is stuck in what they're trying to achieve in terms of development, or is it something that there's a sudden realization that is becoming more and more expensive to run government?
Well, partly because of what you said, becoming more and more expensive to run government, but also you are operating in a growing economy. And therefore, it means each time you do another budget, you are looking to do more than you did last time.
Yeah. What about you, Francis? I mean, last year it was 1.6. The year before it was almost 1.2. The year before that it was 900-something billion shillings. What is the consistency with this incremental budgets that we always see?
I think is the pressure from the region in terms of the growth, and you see Kenya is like in a competition with the rest of Africa. So they are trying to upgrade everything, including infrastructure, right, all from the schools. So basically that kind of momentum which is there to make sure that we compete with our, existing countries around us. And also at the same time, in case you don't upgrade your systems, you don't upgrade your institutions, the investors will shift to Rwanda and Uganda. So that one is one of the key areas the government has been looking at to increase the budget.
Is this something that is acceptable world over, Rosemary?
I actually agree with Martin. As we grow as an economy and as Kenya, even worldwide, we see that as we try to set our priorities straight, we also try to grow how we spend our money. So it is an acceptable thing, but although we also try to say we want to have austerity measures in terms of spending, but I think worldwide it is agreeable that as a developing country, if we want to grow, we have to also increase our spending.
But then again, you look at the breakdown that the National Treasury gave us some time back in April, and you look at cumulatively recurrent expenditure is almost 1 trillion shillings, leaving development with about 471 billion shillings. Is this money the way it is? I know there are certain needs that always occur on a fiscal year to fiscal year, but is this allocation, is the disparity between recurrent and development expenditure something that is of concern?
For us, at the moment, it is a concern. But however, according to the Public Finance Management Act, we are supposed to allocate 70-30. But although we try to strive to do better as development budget, that is an acceptable ratio for our recurrent development budget. However, as you might find that our spending on development has been very unequal to our recurrent, because you might find recurrent, we spend almost 90% of our money, while in development we spend at most 60% to our targets of 80% of spending. So moving forward, we need to at least increase our development spending allocation.
Yeah. But if I was to ask you, Francis, the absorption rate for recurrent seems to be almost 100%. But when it comes to development, this money never seems to trickle down to the intended projects. Perhaps, is that the reason why perhaps development always seems to get slight increments or even reductions when it comes to budget?
A good question, and one of the reasons, which is very key, is our procurement rules and regulations. You understand, for example, you're building the railway. immediately somebody wins a tender, they're about for 3 cases which are going on in the courts. So that one becomes one of the hindrance. The other thing is the fact that when you look at, this recurrent expenditure, is an expenditure for me and you, maybe to go to Europe for a trip. So I'll put that on maybe a priority, then maybe considering the other aspects of developing a country. But as I mentioned, the main hindrance is our procurement, rules, regulations, and our kind of attitude that there's nobody who can win a tender fairly. So wherever you win a tender, everybody goes to court. So that's one of the hindrances which I can mention for now.
Martin, he talks about procurement, and then recently had this tender thing with the security, about 14.5 billion shillings. Direct procurement was done with a local telecom, which government has shareholding, and there was all this hula baloo. Are you in agreement with Francis in terms of procurement is a major hindrance to spending our development money?
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Our procurement procedures are first very elaborate, and secondly, there's obviously a lot of competition when it comes to government tenders, and therefore I have never come across any major procurement done by government which has never been challenged in court. Yeah. And therefore, apart from having lengthy procedures to actually effect the procurement, there's a lot of competition which always ends up in court. And you can take the example of the laptop project. It has not taken off because of such challenges. Yet last year, government allocated billions of shillings towards that project. And it's not the only project. Every other mega project that the government is running today is faced by procurement challenges.
And when you talk about, especially when it comes to absorption, I know challenges always occur when it comes to matters court. But what happens to that money when it's not used? Because you don't see it re-accounted for in the next financial year.
Well, according to government accounting procedures, if you don't spend what you have been allocated, you have to give it back. So that means if there are any funds allocated to a particular activity and were not absorbed, then they go back to the basket for reallocation. Maybe with the exception of the allocations that are made to county governments. Those ones don't come back. But for other state agencies, the money goes back to be allocated. And if you remember recently, we were told, for example, that the 1.4 billion shillings that was paid to Anglo Leasing was reallocated from the laptop money.
Now, Rosemary, if I was to come to you, in all essence, the enactment of the Constitution in 2010 brought about a lot of transparency in the way matters are done. Nowadays, we are able to know almost 3-4 months before June, or before the budget is read, what exactly Treasury is thinking. Is this the kind of transparency that perhaps is needed for people to even interrogate what the CS Treasury is thinking when it comes to the allocations that is talking about in budget estimates?
I actually have to commend the government this time, because actually moved towards the program-based budgeting, which actually shows the mwananchi, you and me, also the media, what they're actually spending, why are they spending on this, and to what extent. So this kind of transparency is actually very acceptable, especially from an accountability perspective. As you must also see that the government announced the budget on April 30th, and soon after they actually published the same estimates on their website. This is actually contrary to most of what county governments are doing. So for national government, they're actually trying to show us more, so that we as a public are able to participate more and give them our priorities.
And Francis, perhaps is Parliament doing its bit in terms of interrogating those numbers and perhaps reallocating? Because that was the essence of actually having these estimates out 3-4 months beforehand, so to ensure that there was public scrutiny of the numbers and participation in terms of the final budget, that the budget that actually comes through when July kicks in.
I can commend the Parliament because it's doing its work, it's a watchdog role, and I've seen various committees commenting on key issues, and more members are becoming more enlightened and they are more qualified. But one of the issues I need to mention is to involve various bodies and stakeholders who are they do more analysis, do more deeper analysis. For example, I can mention like Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya. You need to involve such particular teams. You also need to talk to more of academia and economists and bodies like KEPSA. So as they do that, let them also involve other stakeholders so that we can work on this process together moving forward. It's done, but the scale is not, very good at the moment.
Martin, were there any curveballs this year around from the estimates that you've seen? Was there something that perhaps you think the Treasury came up with that you hadn't expected so far?
Not really, because nowadays we do our budgets based on a particular framework. There's a framework which informs how Treasury is going to prepare its budgets. And based on that framework, we have a budget policy statement which clearly shows what are the government's focus areas and how much resources are going to be allocated to such areas. So once the framework is done, which covers mostly 5 years, then you'll find that for the next 5 years, the budget is addressing a particular direction. And therefore, there will be no major deviations one year to the other.
Yeah, but it's interesting you say that, because this week it's been crazy for our business desk, and we were just out and about talking to different kind of individuals and what they expected from this year's financial budget. And this is something, one of the some things that people out in the streets had to say about this year's financial budget.
Wa review ile budget ya last year ili wananchi wajue kama zile vitu zenye waliweka kwa ile budget ile iliyopita walifanya au wakufanya.
We feel like the government has concentrated more on the businesses that are being taxed already, and there is a wide range of businesses out there that the government should widen the scope and look for other businesses that can be taxed.
Projected expenditure for 2015-2016 is about 1.8 trillion. And 2016-2017, we are going to see expenditure hitting through 2 trillion. What is important for the government is to recognize that while we expand the economy, while we expand with the kind of expenditure we are committing ourselves to infrastructure and other projects, it's important also to raise the revenue.
Interesting views out there. Do you agree with some of the things that are being said?
Yes, I agree with them. Big question is how government is going to be funding all these ambitious projects. And the long-term stated objective, obviously, is to fund government through internal resources, basically domestic revenues. And the question is becoming more relevant to what extent are we going to rely on local resources to be able to fund the ever ambitious budget that the government is rolling out year after year. And if you look at the revenue collection effort, like one of the people say there, we are just focusing on what we have today. The existing taxpayers are squeezed more and more to fund government. And there's very little to show that the government is bringing in more taxpayers into the net. The government is coming with creative ways to find other sources of tax revenue so that the burden is not on the same taxpayers year after year after year.
Obviously, the burden on taxpayers is always something that I think Treasury has found a scapegoat in, because year after year you'll always find something being enacted, whether it's for good, like something they introduced last year in the VAT Act, which was just mainly just to rectify the tax code that exists. But is that always coming back to your golden, the goose that lays you the golden egg? Is that something that Treasury should focus on, or should they actually look at investing more in areas that generate money for this economy?
Actually agree with Martin. I think as a government, they need to expand the tax base. Relying on the golden goose to one point or another will run dry. So as a government, they need to expand what are the areas they need to look at. And also in addition to those, have to consider things that will affect our economy this time. They projected that they'll increase revenue from last year. Yeah. However, we're facing as an economy security issues, and tourism is one of our biggest revenue earners. In addition to agriculture, we have experiencing shortage of rainfall, giving us contributing 25% of our GDP. So we have to look at something different, something new, as opposed to relying to the same old golden goose. Yeah.
Francis, I'm looking at these sources of funding mix, and just right off the bat, tax revenue is estimated to raise about 1.1 trillion shillings. Non-tax revenue, 36.2 billion shillings. Then we expect 57.98 billion shillings from grants. And as always, we're always going back to borrow, and we expect 370.52 billion shillings from loans. Looking at this mix of how government tends to plug this hole, do you think it's balanced for starters?
Yes, it's balanced, but I need to mention the status at the moment. It's balanced at the status at the moment because obviously the government will be having difficulties in terms of expanding the tax base, and it has not put the right steps. And mentioning about that, I still believe the ordinary revenue of what Kenya Revenue Authority is collecting, that is something we need now to look at so that we can unbalance this budget. And one of the things I need to mention around that, people talk about changing the tax law. All that is important. But let me just give you just three key ones of which you need to do to improve the ordinary revenue. One of them is registration of persons and businesses. And that one is not under Rotich. It is the government of the day that Francis Kamau, as an ordinary businessman, will go out and import goods worth 10 million Kenya shillings. Yes, he's going to pay customs. Once you do that, that particular person, are you going to check what he's going to do with those goods? You do not pay tax in terms of income tax, and he's coming to sell those goods here. So the registration is very important. Secondly is e-government. Francis Kamau puts up a flat in Githurai, for example. So the city hall or whatever county government has captured that, and all the estimates are showing that, or all the documents are showing that he has a flat of about 80 flats or 80 houses for that matter. Is he paying rent? So e-government is very, very important. That's outside taxation. Lastly, which I can mention, is the issue surrounding corruption. That corruption basically is the main issue, especially when it comes from customs, going all the way from the businesses and all what is happening. So the issue of corruption needs to be addressed. Those are the issues which are interventions outside Mr. Rotich and which are very, very important. Once you do those ones first, you're able to bring in the informal sector in a big way. Actually, for me to estimate, maybe for ordinary people, it's only around maybe 30% which are paying taxes. 70% in Gikomba, who are earning more than myself, more than yourself, they are not paying taxes, and they need to be brought on the tax net so that the ordinary revenue increases. And I'm sure if we do that, what we are going to look out there in terms of bonds might be maybe like 30 billion. All the others will be sorted out. Lastly is the issue of the wastage. We need also to look at, out of that particular money which you are going to get out there, what is the wastage? Are we trying to make sure we stop wastage? Recently there was an issue of the county, MCAs, trying to, everybody recruiting 6 people. All those issues are very, very important to improve, ordinary revenue.
But Martin, why don't people like paying taxes?
Well, nobody likes pay taxes, that's for sure, the human nature, because you're basically giving out money which you don't know how it's going to be spent. And taxes take away your disposable income. So if I earn 1,000 and government wants 300, then I earn 1,000 but I spend less. But it's not a painful experience if you pay your taxes and the government does its part. The social goods and services that government is supposed to provide are provided at the right level in terms of quantity and quality, and how much it costs the government to do that. It becomes more painful when you're paying taxes and seeing waste, like what Kamau is saying. Money is not accounted for, and there's wastage in public resources and stuff like that, and eventually the whole delivery of social goods and services is impacted negatively. So you're naturally going to feel painful if you are foregoing your personal consumption for the common good, yet the person supposed to take care of common good doesn't take care of common good.
Like Francis was saying, the informal sector is one area I think KRA has identified as somewhere where there's a lot of money that is not being accounted for. We've seen recently a directive, especially in the transport sector, where they think now is going to be e-payments. Just as a matter of creating a system where government or KRA is able to track how much matatus or buses are getting in terms of money, so that there's a certain way that they're able to account for that money. Is this something that should be applied to other different sectors, right down from the hawker to all types of other mwananchi?
Karanja, I will tell you, for a long time I've held the view that this thing we call informal sector is a sick joke that people are banding around to cover non-performance. There's nothing informal in this country anymore, and there should be nothing informal in this day of information technology. Okay? All these informal players operate in this country, but whatever the outcomes of what they do informally is seen in the formal sector. If you give a Kenyan 50 million shillings today or 10 million shillings today, he's likely to buy land, and he will do that transaction with KRA. He's likely to buy a motor vehicle. He will do that transaction with KRA. He's likely to put up a building. He will interact with government in so many directions. So what is informal about that? They are known.
The money is there.
They are known. Whatever transactions they take, we no longer keep money in mattresses. They will go into a bank, which government can access. They'll buy and do many transactions that are within the reach of government authorities to know who is doing what and where. So to me, it's a lack of creativity and innovative thinking. We should not ever give the excuse that we are not collecting enough tax revenues because of an informal sector. There's nothing called informal in this day and age.
But Francis, does this boil down to the way KRA in itself is structured? Because I remember last year during the Taxpayers Awards, the president actually said that there would be some structural realignment at KRA, where perhaps customs and issues to do with border would be more or less semi-autonomous under the whole umbrella of KRA. Perhaps is structural realigning at KRA something that is required for us, for the taxman himself to be able to get the estimate the targets that government keeps throwing at them?
I agree. It's an issue of how KRA is structured, because if you see the emphasis they are putting on large taxpayers' office, as in those guys, they are in the world of their own, and actually they have come with another list of 25 biggest taxpayers for that particular matter. So that particular emphasis that they are only going for the biggest goose, because it's going to pay, or it's going to lay 1,001 eggs instead of this one, which is maybe laying half an egg. But basically because of that, it will be interesting to see that those which are laying half an egg or something will be maybe 1,000, which is bigger than one. So one big one. So what I'm trying to say is the fact that they need to devolve. Their functions to the county level. One of the things we have talked, and actually the Institute of Certified Public Accountants have put a proposal to the minister to consider, is basically to have some of the taxpayers being devolved to the counties so that they pay tax there. Why do I say so? In Gekomba, does City Hall collect money? It collects from everybody. So what is KRA doing around it? It is because the guys in City Hall have gone down to individuals. They are walking around. They know where you are. They are, they are in the streets, and you'll see them in their, kabutis walking around. I've never, and I've been doing so many things in this town, seen such kind of reaction from revenue authorities.
They only come in during enforcement.
They only come during the enforcement. If you look like place like Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, you will see those guys walking on the streets to try, get, the right people, so they can basically work together with, as Martin mentioned, around working with the county people, with the City Hall, for example, in Nairobi, and work hand in hand and collect those revenues the way the City Hall is doing. So they need to restructure on that particular basis.
So, Rosemary, do you agree, the two gentlemen, that KRA should go with the same zeal that it goes after that person who's paying them almost $1 billion shilling in taxes? They should use the same zeal and go after that person who's giving them, even if it's 50 shillings in taxes.
I actually agree, but however, the approach needs to be different. For the one who's paying the 50, of course, they feel the services, as opposed to one who's paying the 50 shillings. At the ground, as Martin said, they don't see the connection between services and the taxes they're paying. So they have to give them an incentive. Why are we paying the taxes as a mwananchi? What can the government do different to show them that if I'm paying the 50 shillings, the road in Gikomba will be built. There'll be security around Gikomba. There'll be in terms of levies in terms of their goods, they'll be different. So there has to be that correlation between the services they deliver and the amount of taxes that they do pay.
Yeah. Just to add something there, I think there's a paradox here. Yeah. You find a revenue authority struggling to get to that guy in Gikomba. Yet, on the other hand, you find you have county governments very eager to raise some revenue through funny means, you know, a coffin tax, a chicken tax, and all that. That should not be the case. I think a good middle course would be for KRA to say, I can't deploy my expensive resources to chase that guy who pays 50 bob. The city or county arrangement seems to work very well with those guys who pay 50 bob. Create a threshold and say a taxpayer below this size I don't want to deal with. Okay? So I'll focus on these guys where the risk is minimal, the revenue yield is much higher, and the cost of collecting those revenues is not high. Then I cede what is below the threshold to the county governments, and I tell the county governments, if you can get to those guys and collect it, it's yours, keep it. So instead of county governments coming to us with funny taxes, they can still collect national taxes because they have the infrastructure and the apparatus to reach everyone, formal or informal, and collect money and collect promptly. So instead of, you know, counties are struggling to raise revenues, yet government has a portfolio of taxpayers which is dysfunctional. Why don't you slice it and say what I consider dysfunctional at national level, I cede that to the county governments. They seem to be doing a good job dealing with people at that level. Let them collect that. And then we see what the outcome is. If the county governments are able to collect, then maybe next time round, we will then review the allocations that you make to the county and say that you are actually able to generate so much from the economic activity in your county. We will adjust your allocation, okay? And it's a win-win situation for everyone.
So is it a matter of KRA having an office in all county governments?
No, because KRA doesn't need even to go to the county. Because
I'm looking at it from this point of view. Not all county governments are, let's pick just Nairobi and somewhere, let's say like Kirinyaga County. Perhaps the structures there are slightly different, but I guess the mechanisms of getting to the
it is possible. Level. It is possible because one of the interventions that KRA put in place some time back to deal with the small players, for example, is the thing they called turnover tax, which has, you know, it never worked. It didn't succeed. And again, it didn't succeed because of the same reasons we're talking about. How do you reach that guy in Gikomba and those remote places and make sure they're complying with that? So my suggestion, as I said, is cede that to the county governments. They deal with these people on a daily basis. They know who has opened a bar, they know who has opened a supermarket, they know all the farmers in their localities, they know all the economic activity taking place within their jurisdiction. So they're the ones who are better placed to deal with that activity. And every county, regardless of, you know, its economic circumstances, has some economic activity. You will find businessmen running all sorts of businesses, and they're constantly interacting with county authorities. So if you cede those taxpayers to the county governments will do a better job extracting tax revenues from those businesses than somebody sitting in Nairobi trying to reach the remote parts of Kenya.
Yeah, Matthew will come back and talk about those people at the county level. But two geese that have been seem to have been laying the golden eggs for the government have been people in the alcohol and tobacco manufacturing sectors who have always been hit by something that we call the sin tax. And now Asha Mwiliu on Monday was out in the streets and filed us this report on how the government always seems to be turning back to the sin tax in trying to finance its ambitious budget.
Apart from having to justify why this financial year will have the biggest budget in the country's history, 1.77 trillion shillings, on Thursday, the Finance Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich will also have to explain to Kenyans where this money is coming from. Already, Kenyans are concerned that, as usual, the taxpayer will bear the biggest burden. And the first group to be smoked out may well be the usual suspects, consumers of cigarette and alcohol in what is often called sin tax.
We saw what happened when the taxation on senator was increased. It led to the growth of illicit alcohol in the market. And in the last 1 month, we saw the negative effect that had. We lost about 100 Kenyan lives to illicit alcohol. So our plea to the government as Kenya Association of Manufacturers is not to target those industries.
While the increase of sin tax may have its downside, many Kenyans are more worried about the basic commodities. Tax experts have warned that the 1.8 trillion shilling budget will most likely force the government to push up the taxes.
Mtu nafanyia kama shilingi kama 500. Ukikuja sukari ni shilingi 100, unga ni shilingi 150. Ukikuja kwa mboga imeongezeka, mafuta imeongezeka, sasa hakuna kitu unafanyia. Ile kitu unafanyia kama ni 1000 inakwisha siku moja hivi ukiwa unafanya.
Wanatupandishia ushuru juu na pale tunauza vitu tunauza chini sana.
The leaders concerned not to focus mostly on basic goods, but they can explore more ways of collecting taxes apart from basic commodities.
Maminista wanatembea na magari 4, 5, wananchi wa chini hata chakula ni shida, ule ugali ni sima ya chini, pia watu hawezi kuafford. Nchi imeharibika, nchi imekuwa mbaya. Uhuru ndugu yangu nakwambia, habari ya kupandisha ushuru hakuna, fikiria watu wa chini.
What's left the government in another awkward spot is the Auditor General's report revealing that at least a third of the country's budget goes to waste. Treasury is now on the spot to seal those leakages before taxing Kenyans more than they can handle.
We are not succeeding in widening our tax net. We're going after the same taxpayers over and over and over again, and therefore we've sort of killed the goose that's laying the golden eggs for us.
The government should instead look at expanding the tax base, because there are many people who don't pay taxes in Kenya who should be paying taxes ideally. The government should also look at tax leakages. Where are we having tax leakages in our country? That should be addressed instead of having a sin tax.
With the countdown to budget day now on, the biggest headache for President Uhuru Kenyatta's government will be to rally the country behind its second budget as Kenyans wait anxiously for promises to be delivered. Asha Mwilu, KTN, Nairobi.
A nice story there by Asha. But even before we even look at the 2014-2015 budget, it's always important just to take a step back and look at what was there the previous year. And I filed this story on Tuesday, and I was just basically trying to look at the 2013-2014 budget. And this is something that looks like the government is actually having a few hits and misses when it came to what it expected from the last budget. Take a look at this. June 11, 2013, Henry Rotich walks out of Treasury building and repeats a scene that has been played out for a number of decades. Holding the budget briefcase aloft, the Cabinet Secretary held the dreams of a nation anchored on the manifesto laid out by the Jubilee administration during the campaign period. At 1.64 trillion shillings, the budget focused on 6 priority areas that were the clarion call during the campaign period. These were food security, where 2 billion shillings was set aside for the agribusiness fund to aid farmers expand their production. A further 3.6 billion shillings was devoted to the 1 million acre Galana irrigation program. The excitement over that project had barely kicked off when alarm bells went off over potential food shortage. 6 billion shillings earmarked for the presidential runoff was redirected to the youth and ways of funds. However, the government failed to institute structures that would have seen companies offer internship or employment opportunities to students leaving university. Analysts believe that the government might have bitten off more than it could chew and failed to prioritize what it needed to do first.
Well, I think the government was new at the time. Obviously, I think in terms of rating, we gave them a B. They did very well, being a few months in office after election.
Kenyans, however, give a rather harsh verdict of the government's performance.
These people, they are just politicians who just come on the ground looking for votes, enticing you, but when now you come to reality, they cannot achieve them. In fact, instead, they even eat the money.
53.2 billion shillings was set aside for the much-hyped laptop project for Standard 1 going children. Challenges in procurement coupled with mounting budgetary shortfalls saw the project shelved for another year.
You may have a budget, but if you don't plan better, you will not be able to spend it. And it is a pity that budget earmarked for development goes back to the treasury without being spent.
A shining light in the current budget would have to be the introduction of free maternal care in public hospitals. However, the health sector has been rocked with staff shortages, not to mention failure to invest in new hospitals. The 1.5% railway development levy imposed on all imported goods has also worked wonders for the government, netting 14.4 billion shillings against a 9.9 billion shilling projection. The introduction of the VAT Act last year has, however, been linked to the rising cost of living that has seen inflation rise to 7.3%. Michael Karanja, KTN.
All right, now just looking at those two stories, Rosemary, if I was to start with you, it's always interesting to talk to the man on the streets, and there's always that anger that they seem to have towards government whenever it's budget, because they always know that they'll be the first people to be looked at when it comes to financing this budget in terms of taxes. Is their anger valid?
I think the anger is valid, because that it goes back to the issue of the services. As a manager, they do not feel that what they're paying is actually correlating to what they're getting, they will be angry. Yeah. However, as a manager, they have to realize that government is operating in a new dispensation, so they do have to give them some kind of leeway. However, in terms of priorities, as your clip has said, they did have some misses and hits last time. I also think for this time, there have been some hits. For example, education has been well catered for. However, for education, one of the misses that I saw was that they're spending 1.76 billion on a new ICT development program, which is actually more of what they're actually spending on pre-primary education. So such kind of priorities are actually worrying to the public in terms of how priorities for the people equating to the priorities of the public.
Yeah. Now, Francis, if you just wind up in terms of sources of funding, already the government says that they have a deficit of about 342 billion shillings.
Exactly.
But there's this one thing that I think they have lashed all their hopes on, and it's called the Eurobond. It's something we've had for the last almost 3 years, and it seems that it's coming to fruition. You've even seen certain payments being made just to pave the way for this Eurobond to be floated. And even Henry Rotich is coming from a European farm trip where he was actually selling the idea of this Eurobond. When you look at those two and the way they relate to funding in terms of actualizing the 1.77 trillion shilling budget, does it add up?
Yeah, it adds up basically, because if you look at the kind of deficit that we have of 342 billion, apart from the domestic kind of financing that you're trying to get, you basically have to go out and look for money out there, and which is maybe cheaper, because you are looking at a rate of 7.5 or 8.5 around there for the Eurobond, which is a bit better. So it's adding up, but I still believe as we go out there, I mentioned we need to put measures in place to make sure that by the time we are going out, we have exhausted internally or domestically, because I still believe Kenya, we can raise the whole of that ambitious budget, having considered the informal sector and having reduced on the issue of wastage. But having said that, remember, if you look at the areas whereby the other countries have gone to look for the Eurobond out there, like Rwanda, you'll see also Nigeria, Ghana, they got it at a cheaper rate, so at a 6.5, 7.5 lower than us. I don't know, because of the credit rating that we are good at. Last year, I think we are at, according to Standard & Poor's, we are at B+. So I really do not know exactly where we are going at, or maybe we are trying to whet the appetite of the investors out there. So, but as I mentioned, we need to put measures in place to make sure that we are going for that particular money, because we cannot fund it internally. That's the question every Kenyan should be asking.
Martin, looking back at the 2013-2014 budget, two key surprises for me. It was first of all the introduction of the capital gains tax, which I'm not sure whether they've actually actualized, and the introduction of the 1.5% railway development levy. I think the railway development levy is something they hadn't anticipated how much it would go, but being a import-oriented kind of economy, we were doing something of close to 14.4 billion shillings against a projection of about 9.9 billion shillings. Given that's what they introduced last year, are we likely to see any surprises? And do you think that those two elements were successful last year?
Insofar as the levy is concerned, yes, it was fairly successful, the railway development levy, and even this year it's projected to collect quite a substantial amount, nearly 20 billion shillings, if I'm not wrong. But the whole area of capital gains tax is one that has not been very successful. It's something that clearly makes our taxation system very inequitable. Because, first of all, in many jurisdictions in the world, you have capital gains tax. And when you have a capital gains tax system, in a certain sense, you are seeking to tax wealth. In this country, we have wealthy people, but we don't have a way of taxing the wealthy people because we don't have a wealth tax. And therefore, you are clearly not running an equitable system if the wealthy people in the economy are not paying taxes and the poor people are the ones who are paying taxes. That capital gains tax thing has to come, and it has to be perhaps one of the new sources that the government has to put in place to be able to bring in additional revenue and relieve the burden that the existing taxpayers are facing. So unless we have a system of capital gains taxation in the country, our taxation system is inequitable, it is unfair, and is overburdening the wrong people.
Given that we already know what they're planning, what the money they're looking for is, where they plan to spend it, do you expect any surprises in terms of how they expect to raise it, especially through taxes?
Unless, as I said, unless you're finding new sources, if you try to change anything within the existing framework, you're going to cause a lot of harm. Already, it is very clear that the new VAT law that came last year is causing more harm than good in terms of cost of living. Yet, if you look at statistics, is it bringing in more money than the old VAT system? And the answer is no. So it's causing a lot of aggravation to the common people and the economy as a whole, yet it is not earning government the revenues that we were told it is going to earn. Is it changing, for example, the VAT refund situation? Is it getting better now with the new VAT law as we promised? Unfortunately, the answer is no. The refund position is getting worse even with the new VAT law. So why are you bringing tax measures that are causing a lot of aggravation in society and the economy, yet it is not benefiting us?
As we just finish up on this whole issue about taxes, it's been something to do with tax refunds. When the tourism sector was in a crisis, we had the president come out and say we'll clear all the tax refunds owed to players in the tourism industry in the next 2 weeks. Is that something that is achievable? And if you do it for one sector, isn't there supposed to be like hue and cry from even especially people from the manufacturing sector who have been actually pushing Treasury and KRA for their money back?
Well, I can mention on that, and the president talked about income tax refunds. First of all, the income tax refunds are so minute in this economy. Actually, the ones which are major are VAT refunds. Let me ask you one question. Do you have VAT refunds in tourism sector? The answer is no, actually. Apart from maybe Kenya Airways and other airways which are in that. But, you know, the rail operators we are talking about here, it's minimal, still VAT refunds. So I don't see it benefiting anybody. The other thing Martin has mentioned is about aggravation. In terms of you bring inequities in the tax system, that you do it for this sector, then you leave the other sector. You are actually trying to create noise, and you know that aggravation of the mwananchi and the companies themselves, so that they don't feel included in the whole process.
Yeah. Moving on, Rosemary, we've seen what the government is targeting, 1.77 trillion shillings. That's what it plans to spend in the next financial year. We've seen how they're planning to use that money. But when it comes to things like allocation, First of all, do you think, looking at the estimates that they gave, are you happy with the kind of allocation balance that they've given to different sectors of the economy?
In terms of the sectors, I do agree they have spent well. But however, in terms of the overall budget, we still see the CFS, the debt and the salaries and the pensions still taking 20% of our budget. At where we are right now as an economy, we need to at least have a balance between our services and our debt. So until we have a straight budget towards our debt, towards rationalizing our wage bill and putting freeing more funds to go towards services, I don't think the budget has been balanced in the correct way.
But what are some of the highlights in terms of how they allocated money? Are there certain sectors that you looked at and so that there was some emphasis in terms of the money that they were getting?
Yes, of course. If you look, for example, at development expenditure, the government appears very serious about the question of infrastructure. Of course, challenge is always how to implement things, but there's quite some sizable allocations to roads, power, energy, and other, physical infrastructure. So, which is a good thing. Yeah. That we need to correct. We need to put this infrastructure in place so that we are a more productive economy, whether it's manufacturing, agriculture, etc. So that to me is a good focus, subject of course to implementation if it's going to be right. And this is where I always say I don't think there's been any Kenyan finance minister who was ever worried about budget deficit, because it will never be spent. So there will never be a deficit in the actual sense of the word. Obviously, there's a good focus in terms of social services, education, health, water, sanitation, and all those things are also getting more and more attention, which is a good thing, and which I think in the long run improves the quality of living of the people.
Francis, if I just give like a breakdown of what we saw, we see something like security, which through the different line ministries or state departments is getting almost 190 billion shillings, with even the National Intelligence Service even getting something almost like, I don't know, it was 36 or 73 billion shillings on its own. Then we come to sectors like agriculture through the different state departments getting something like 36.9 billion shillings, energy 76.9, the Ministry of Industrialization and Enterprise getting 9.2 billion shillings, despite that ministry saying that they were looking back to reignite the textile and leather industry. Then you find something like tourism at 4 billion and mining at 2 billion shillings. If I look at this, obviously security is something that is required, but if I look at actually sectors that are supposed to generate income, I'm not seeing whether if they're being given the right amount of funding to generate the kind of economic growth that we're targeting.
No, I agree with you. When it comes to the key sector of security, I see the allocations seem not enough. Actually, if you look at the growth in terms of allocation is less than 5%. So I don't think the government should be losing ground in terms of securing this country. Actually, the recent meeting between KEPSA and the president, they mentioned about the issue of security as a first issue, because they want to be in a world whereby you're operating in a 24-hour system. If you look for people who are next to industry area, next to a slum down there, by 3:30 they go home because of insecurity. And you see that is a bread and basket manufacturing side of Kenya, and it's not secure. So basically mentioning around that, they need to put measures in place to ensure at least we secure this particular, this country of ours. But having said that, there's another sector I need to mention of education, and of which what we are trying to see around there is a situation whereby the kind of the kind of funding we are looking at it is not looking at the quality, and the quality is very important in education, because you see everybody, including maybe ourselves, our kids maybe in private schools. So they need, as they try to put the pre-primary education in place, they need to look at the quality of exactly what they are giving to Kenyans. Lastly, in education, remember, if you look at, for some of us who have traveled to places like Loktang, we really do not see the need of this laptop project. I think the president requires to talk about a computer lab. That one is a computer lab for about 5 schools. For example, you go to Nairobi, you put a computer lab for 5 primary schools where the kids can go for, for sessions, computer sessions for that matter. So that's an area which I also wanted to highlight. And the other thing is tax with representation. Yeah. We also need to see whatever you are putting in place, like security, the retro you are putting, even if you're talking about, about 180 billion on that particular base, do we see that particular money actually securing Kenyans? I don't think if you do a comparative analysis between Kenya and Rwanda, I've worked in Rwanda for a period myself. What are they putting in the security system and Kenya? That is a 24-hour economy. Kenya, we are not. But the money we are putting in it is like the whole of economy of Rwanda. So that is in security. That's a question which I can pose for security for now.
Rosemary, we had from those 3 stories that have been there, the issue around planning is something that has come out very strongly. And I think that boils down to the absorption rate as well when it comes even to spending this money. As from the estimates, are we for this coming financial year, should we expect anything different?
From the estimates?
Yeah. Even from the way we are going forward, from the estimates that we've seen, and the challenge around planning and prioritizing certain areas, should we expect that the government this year around will actually turn around and actually be more impactful in the way it absorbs the money that it sets aside for itself?
I certainly do hope so, especially the issue of the absorption. As Martin mentioned before, I think planning is the core. Apart from the procurement process, without planning, we're not able to actually execute our procurement, because you might find that something that would require 1 year, we realize 1 year later that we needed to do it 1 year before. So the issue of planning stems down to the issue of how we try to absorb our money moving forward. So we do hope so that this year, going back to the control of budget and the treasury, they won't give us the issues of, again, saying that money was taken back to treasury and that people are spending the money as they were supposed to. So we actually do hope that this will be different this year.
Martin, I'll just cut you off there, but we will be back after this short commercial break just to discuss issues to do with the 2014-2015 budget. Don't go away. And welcome back. You are on KTN, where we are discussing the 2014-2015 budget. Now, if you just look at something that happened last year after the general elections, we created 47 county governments. And this year around, they have been given 226 billion shillings, which is about 6 billion shillings more than what they were given last year. And just, Martin, if I was just to start with you, the challenges that we have at the county level just seem to mirror what the failures of the national government, especially when it comes to absorption and mismanagement of funds. Now that they've gotten this amount of 226 billion against their recommendation, or what they actually want, of 40% of all national taxes that are collected, what's the main challenge with county budgeting process?
Well, I think one thing people don't appreciate is that with the 2010 constitution, which brought about things like county governments, it's a very huge change in terms of how we run things in this country. Yeah. And therefore, change is not always going to happen on a straight line. Change sometimes can be chaotic. And again, I think we are expecting too much too soon from some of these new things that we have done, including devolution. I don't think devolution will work in 2014, 2020. It will take time, particularly because, first of all, you're devolving from a chaotic system. Definitely chaos gets devolved as well. But these changes, and I think somebody is not managing public expectations very well, that these changes will take time to implement and bear fruit. People thought that, you start county governments in 2013 and everything is working clockwork, budgeting, implementation, and all that. It is wrong. It can't happen like that. We are moving from one government to 48 governments. It cannot be a smooth, straight line process. There'll be lots of hiccups. There'll be a lot of, things that happen, and change has never been a straight line. Yeah. Okay, and therefore somebody should be managing expectations. Maybe it was a mistake to go 48 governments at once. Maybe it should have been phased. But it would be wrong to expect that everything will work clockwork in 2014 or even 2020. To my mind, I think we need a bit of time before this thing can work properly.
Rosemary, why is it that people are so jittery when it comes to money and county governments? Because you always hear that county governments want more, but people are like, no, you first of all deal with the little money that you have. You waste it now so that we can actually know that the challenges that actually lie in the county level.
Something, Karanja, you said that the term waste it now.
Yeah.
I think also they assume that they will waste it. But I want to disagree with something Martin has said about the issue of expecting too much too soon. Although we have tried to curb expectations, I want to quote something that the Vice President said that although county governments are new, the ills of the national don't have to be the ills of the county government. They have a clean slate. They came in with completely new, nothing burdening them. So as a county government, also as citizens, we need to give them that benefit of the doubt that they are able to actually do this, that we're able to give them more. However, the issue of waste has been brought up, the issue of absorption has been brought up, but moving forward, we need to at least give them the benefit of the doubt that they're able to do this without expecting them to waste the money.
Francis, what are some of the concerns, especially when it comes to the devolving funds?
Oh, that's great. But let me just handle the issue of the numbers. Martin has mentioned about the number of counties. These are 47 counties. Let me give you a comparative of what is happening in Africa. South Africa are doing 9 provinces, and they're all trying now to reduce them to 8 because it's too much. When you come to a place like China, they're doing 23, governments for that matter. Then we have a country like Nigeria, which is seen to be more chaotic somehow, and they're doing 34. So we still have bigger numbers than Nigeria, with US 50. Trying to look at that, I still believe it is not too late to rethink about making our counties to be either 6 or 10 in between, like the former provinces. So, because the burden is too much. But having said that, there are certain areas we need to look at for counties in terms of devolving. Someone has mentioned that we devolved, chaos. That's good. But remember, by the time you're devolving chaos, the chaos were already in those counties. For example, if I look at Nakuru County, they took the work of the municipal council, which was maybe more chaotic than the central government. So already, even if you're devolving counties, you're devolving those particular chaos to meet other chaos in the counties. So the issue of accountability is very important, and they need to involve the stakeholders, even if they would like to go for independent auditors. If the government agency in terms of auditing and accounting is not able, they can basically give auditors who are certified by the institute to do that particular work.
And are you comfortable with the level of funding that they're getting?
The level of funding is okay. As I mentioned, the issue for the county is absorption, actually. I'm very, very sure, and I think the panelists will agree with me, that at the end of the year, apart from maybe some counties like Machakos, maybe, most of the other guys are going to return that money unspent. So that is another issue of absorption. The other issue is transparency. Are they transparent? And as I said, most of those municipalities were chaotic already. We need more transparency in whatever they are doing, and we need to check round the clock on how they are spending the money. Having said that, I mentioned when we were starting about one member of county assembly allocating himself 6 employees. Even I presume the deputy president don't have such people surrounding him. So it's a matter of wastage, absorption, transparency, and accountability, all of them rolled into one.
When you're discussing revenue collection, Martin, you introduced something very interesting, and that is a matter of giving county governments the responsibility of going after a certain level of tax-paying people within their jurisdiction. Now, I'm just looking at that. Obviously, all 47 counties are totally different because some have higher levels of activity than others. But just looking at that, how feasible is that in terms of implementing? Is it something that government should actually think about so that we find money that was supposed, let's say if Nairobi is collecting X amount, the money that we cut from there, that's why we give to places like Mandera or other areas in the northeastern province?
It's possible. It is possible. It's only that maybe people have not started thinking in that direction. But if you want to pursue that option, to my mind, I think it is quite feasible. Even if you say that different counties are endowed differently. If you take Nairobi County, you could say economically it's the biggest county and therefore, if you take that approach, you're likely, as Nairobi County, to collect a lot of revenue. And remember also, Nairobi County gets the lion's share of the county allocation. Yeah. So, for example, if we piloted with Nairobi and said, let's see how it works in Nairobi, you're likely to raise a lot of revenue. And if you slashed Nairobi's county allocation by half and send it to those counties that are not well endowed economically, then you have a more equitable distribution system. So it can work. And I believe in a place like Nairobi, I don't think there's anyone running any kind of business who has never interacted with the city council, askaris, for example. So it has a better enforcement mechanism which we're not deploying for the benefit of our overall revenue collection effort. And that's what I'm saying. We should find a way in which there's cooperation at national and county government level, okay? And to incentivize county governments to take part in assisting the national government collect revenues, you have to give them an incentive and say, either we seed that revenue in total or we share it, okay? Yeah. Now, in terms of revenue collection, it's not just the quantum of revenue that you collect. If I'm able to recruit a taxpayer, I've created a revenue stream that will last many years. Yeah. So netting a new taxpayer is much more than finding, expanding your revenue base or increasing tax rates so that you collect more. If I recruit a taxpayer today, I've created a revenue stream, and that revenue stream is going to be there for a long time to come. So if national government works with county governments, the county governments are going to be much more effective in terms of recruiting new taxpayers. Yeah. And if it works very well in future, we can go back to the old arrangement. But I think if we think that the informal sector is a huge problem in terms of revenue mobilization, we have to talk to the county governments and work with them.
Rosemary, talking about this symbiotic relationship between national government and county governments, given the fact that the end goal is actually economic growth, shouldn't then the budget planning process be intertwined in a certain way that national government says that these are our key priority areas this year, which counties actually contribute to this national thinking, and so that they're able to prepare their budgets in a similar line that actually thinks towards that 5.8% economic growth that the government is actually targeting in this coming financial year?
I agree. Actually, the EFM actually provides for that. As you see, the national government does prepare the budget policy statement. At the same time, the county prepares the county fiscal strategy paper, which is supposed to align to the budget policy statement. However, you might find that for the counties, they do not say specifically how they will align their priorities to the national government. So I think there's a disparity in terms of to what extent a county is matching up to the national priorities. So I think going back to the issue of planning, they need to be capacitated enough so that they're able to do planning in order to meet the national priorities at the same time.
Talking about priorities, just going back just to the general 1.77 trillion shilling budget that the CS is going to make a statement on later this afternoon. Do you think that they have prioritized certain areas well, if you just look at even the allocations from security to different sectors of the economy?
Yes, the priorities has been there. If you look at agriculture, they're talking about irrigation, which is very key. They are talking about developing of dams and water ponds. They're talking about strategic grain reserves, which are very good, methods of trying to secure our economy, securing our lives. Yeah. So it is a good measure. The only issue is that one of the things I like understanding from the government is that maybe at one point or the other it has limited resources which are being shared. So yeah, they have tried to as much as possible. Now, having said that, remember there are certain areas they need to refocus on, because I still believe, as we are mentioning, some of the areas like health and agriculture, some of these functions have been devolved. And I think you have talked about that particular bit. If you look at the figures they are giving us, they are not also giving us about the interventions by council themselves, by counties themselves, in terms of what have been devolved. in that, especially things like strategic grain reserves. So they basically need to be in sync, and they give us figures for both county and national government so that we basically see how it is churning out. Having said that, you'll see the government has put up some money for irrigation. And I've seen, like now, Machakos County have been talking about water funds and irrigation. How does it run in that particular aspect, and how do you integrate that particular financial planning between the national government and county government? But in terms of priority, yes, I agree. They have tried with the limited resources that they have.
Now, as you end up, Martin, estimates are out. We already know what the government is thinking. Do you expect any surprises today?
Not much.
Yeah?
Not much. I don't expect surprises. It may be slightly different from last year in the sense that last year there was not enough time for the current government to do its stuff, in terms of preparing for the budget. And I think this time they have had enough time to be able to do their own budgeting, and probably would do a better job this time than last year. But again, looking at the way we are expanding our national budget, definitely there'll have to be some drastic measures to be able to sustain such a huge budget.
Rosemary, your last thoughts?
My last thoughts are, I'd like to see what they want to do in terms of taxation. So it is interesting to see what they'll try to raise domestically in terms of revenue.
Francis?
The tax reform also I need to mention. I've seen they are coming up with reforms on developing a new area on extractive industry. I would like to see how they are going to work on that. The other intervention is about the issues around overhauling the income tax system. I would like to see how they are going to do it and integrate that with the capital gains tax. So I'm eager to see how he's going to mention, though he has been talking about changing this particular aspect for the last 3 years, but we have not seen the implementation of what he's talking about.
Lady, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And thanks for your deep thoughts into what the 2014-2015 budget will actually look like when the CS actually makes his other announcements later on this afternoon. So, Sophie, I think by now you already gotten some insight of what we should expect later on this afternoon.
Yeah, and also my concerns, just like she said, really on taxation, how the government will seek to raise that money, because it's a lot of money. So where will the ordinary mwananchi feel the pinch, and at the same time not increase cost of living, because that is we're already doing badly. So it's a tricky balancing act, I guess, for the government.
But now it's summertime.
But now it's summertime, you're right. Away from all that money talk to the field, and we'll be crossing to the fields after we come back from the short break, because our sports desk is all good to go to bring you all the updates from the World Cup that starts today. Big deal around the world. Don't go away. Stay with us right here on KTN.